Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we have a couple of the state's leading reporters. We're going to look back on 2013, the big stories of the past year, and then we'll look ahead with our all-star business panel following these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, well, welcome back to the program. Well, it's unclear about whether you should like what happened in 2013 and you want to move quickly on to 2014. But having said that, we have two of the state's leading reporters, and we're going to talk about the big stories of the year. Joining me, as often is the case, is Mary Wilson with Pennsylvania Public Radio, and John Micek. He's the editorial page editor of the Harrisburg Patriot-News, and I have to add, come on, PennLIVE, right?
PennLIVE.com. That's
PennLIVE.com. Right. How do they follow you on Twitter?
At Mary Wilson.
At Mary Wilson?
At by John L. Micek.
There you go. It's that simple. You want to follow them. You'll keep you up to date on all things politics and government. All right, John Micek, you get the first one. Looking backwards, 2013. Go through. Give me one of your big stories.
God, it's got to be transportation funding.
Absolutely.
Doesn't it? The biggest public policy question of the last year, and probably the only really major piece of legislation to come out of the General Assembly this year. A $2.3 billion funding package for roads, bridges, and mass transportation across the state. The product of a lot of wrangling between legislative leaders and Governor Corbett, and they finally got it over the goal line around Thanksgiving time.
You agree with that?
Yeah, that was one of
on your
I
list?
can prove it. That's one on my list.
There you go.
And it followed a kind of like a really, to me, was kind of a cinematographic collapse of Corbett's legislative agenda in June. Corbett administration kind of went back, regrouped, revamped its effort lobbying that bill, lobbying the legislature on that bill, and then it passed, John said.
They worked hard. there was a huge coalition. The governor weighed in. Let's be honest. Governor has been criticized on some issues for being a little passive. Am I right? Mm-hmm. Not being fully engaged in that.
The hero of this story is PennDOT's Secretary Barry Shoke, as far as I'm concerned. The guy practically wore a groove in the hallway, walking from one end of the Capitol to the other, explaining to legislators in great detail how they would benefit from this transportation funding plan, and engaging in a bit of political theater by weight restricting bridges back in June, trying to, A, it was a public safety thing, but B, there was undoubtedly an element of politics about it to drive home the reality of what would happen if you didn't pay, if you didn't fix these 4,000 structurally deficient bridges.
Right. And the final point before we go to your story, Mary, something unusual happened in the course of the passage of that legislation. Labor and business community virtually united. They were united,
cats
right?
Laid down in the streets together, lions and lambs.
Lions and lambs, and they worked hard together. It does show you, there's, compromise is always possible, and you can get some bipartisanship. The votes in the end, were pretty bipartisan, right? Yes. More Democrats than Republicans, I think, in the end, but nonetheless.
Passed with Republican, it wouldn't have passed without majority Republican support in the House, which was the big hurdle.
Great point. Mary, big story of the year.
I'm going to call this number 2 on our list for me is gay marriage. Okay. The ACLU filing a suit against the state to take down to reverse the state's gay marriage ban, same-sex marriage ban. So you've got that working its way through the federal court, and trial has been scheduled for 2014, early June. And then we've got in the state courts, we have this whole issue of shortly after the ACLU case came about, we've got a court clerk issuing marriage licenses.
Yeah, Bruce Haynes, issued, and that's in court now, right? Whether
he
can do that. Well, as a related story, John, a certain attorney general in our state by the name of Kathleen Kane did what?
Yeah, this is actually going to go to a number
sort of
later
related to your story.
This is going to be number 3 on my list, but so we'll call it number 2.5. Attorney General Kathleen Kane made national headlines by citing a portion of the Commonwealth Attorneys Act, saying that she could punt on stuff that she found ethically intolerable. So she promptly punted on a defense of the mayor statute over to the Office of General Counsel. In the Corbett administration, they took one look at that and then punted that one out to private counsel, the former Supreme Court Justice Bill Lamb.
So we got 2 different venues. We're in 2 different venues for court, right? We're in state court and we're in federal court, looking at different aspects of it. Most people think, Mary Wilson, this is going to end up in the United States Supreme Court. the whole issue of gay marriage and, whether, in fact, states can prevent. Go ahead. Finish my
Yeah,
thought.
I mean, reporters have asked, the ACLU's legal director, is this bound for Supreme Court? And he'll say, I certainly hear that. I think he has said to me in the past, at least, well, a lot of people think their case is going to go to Supreme Court, and they take such a small percentage of cases. But this might be the one.
Well, you've got dominoes tumbling all around the state. Let's face it, right? Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, all legalizing same-sex unions. 15 states. I mean, it's now not a ripple. It's a cultural wave. Now it's not a matter of when the state will do this, or if rather the state will do this, but a matter of when.
Now, before we run to a break, but just this past week, Governor Corbett signed on, in a sense, to legislation that would end employment discrimination against gender identity and sexual orientation, if I got the words right, and I think I do.
Right.
And that was pretty big news as well, correct?
Right. The governor says this doesn't change his stance on same-sex marriage, which he still, he attributes it to his upbringing, that he doesn't believe that should be
but it's
a change in the law.
For him,
but this
correct?
is a new position. Before he doesn't say it's a change in a position.
I got it.
On the
Because he didn't
anti-discrimination
have
bill. Yeah, he says he didn't have one.
All right, we're going to run to a break. We're going to get other big stories of the past year in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation, educating citizens and business leaders about important public policy issues and civic affairs. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, Mary Wilson and John Micek are here. Both of them are reporters. Now one's an editorial page editor of a newspaper. He's still a reporter. He still has to cover stories. Isn't that right? You go do your thing.
I'm like the ghost who won't go on to the next
I
live.
love that. All right.
Pretty much
you want to
it
make
is.
a quick point on the...
Yeah, just back to the same-sex marriage thing and Governor Corbett supporting this bill to end gender discrimination or sexual and gender orientation in the workplace. Guys like Brian Sims, the openly gay state lawmaker from Philadelphia, have said that this is the first hurdle that they have to get past on the way to same-sex marriage. So this is the governor may not have changed his position, but this is a fairly significant achievement for the gay and lesbian community here.
And a lot of and Democrats were applauding him on this.
Yes, that's right.
Which is
Exactly
not a common occurrence.
No.
All right, your next big story.
Well, we move on to, we mentioned this, my 2.5 will go straight on into 3, Governor Corbett versus Kathleen Kane, or Governor Corbett versus every single Democrat in the state, it seems like.
Running against
who are
him?
running against him. There are 8 at last count. Congresswoman Allison Schwartz, State Treasurer Rob McCord. We could run down the list.
You'll forget them all.
We'll be here all morning. The point being is that it's going to be a very crowded Democratic primary field going into the new year. That field may thin a bit the closer we get to the Democratic endorsement meeting as fundraising realities set in.
And the filing period in February.
March.
Yeah.
Again, we've talked about this ad infinitum on this show, and there was a Quinnipiac poll out this week, again, showing soft numbers and Governor Corbett trailing his Democratic challengers. He is undoubtedly going to go into a very tough re-election season.
I think,
that means that's past cliche now, right? Though, but you can start looking at the race now and saying the campaign is fully underway.
I think that's true. Was that on your list?
That was not on my list, but I had something probably similar, which I just called the but the unquiet of the Corbett administration this year, where you see, like I mentioned earlier, a legislative agenda that fails to get any traction at the end of the budgeting process in June, and then you have a staff shakeup. You have the third chief of staff in as many years. Right. You have a totally new kitchen cabinet.
Is better. This seems to be better for all the stuff that I read that you folks were writing seemed to indicate that this was on the positive side for the governor.
Seems to be better. Yeah, seems to be better. But it follows a year of fecklessness and a hapless administration. So now a kitchen cabinet that has completely changed. I mean, he's got a new, we've gone over this, but he's got a whole new press shop basically around him. He's got a new chief of staff. So that happens. And then it's kind of been a year of maybe heightened attention to, but of gaffes. And so where, we've been faced with, okay, here's the easy to misunderstand thing that the governor said. Here's the policy issue underneath it. And here's why it's going to be received so badly. And we've seen, a series of dismal polls on the governor, showing his job approval rating is just on a downward trend and not turning around.
I actually thought, given what we've seen, now with the position on discrimination in the workplace and transportation, I actually would be somewhat surprised if they didn't come up a bit. I'm not predicting that, but given some of the more outward going, the governor's now more definitely involved, more engaged.
Yeah, in Katie True, you have a legislative secretary who speaks the language of the General Assembly. Right. She served in the House for many years, was respected, and Mary was right. There's a new tone coming out of the press shop. Lynn Lawson, the communications director, and Jay Pagny, the press secretary, have been very aggressive about trying to change.
And that matters to you all because you have to make the calls and get
it not only matters to us, but it matters to the administration in terms of message delivery. And the administration got in its own way for 3 years in trying to get its story out. Now you have two people who understand what it's like to communicate effectively, and you're starting to see whether or not they can turn the ship. But it's beginning to happen.
You get one more.
Oh God, one more. Pensions, isn't it? The debate over public employee pensions, another unresolved issue. One of the governor's three sort of cornerstone budget issues. We're talking about what, a $1 billion pension contribution next year, state contribution.
It's going to be a huge chunk of the budget.
Huge chunk of the budget, $41 billion unfunded liability, get rid of $64 billion. A number of plans that were floated toward year's end, none of which got acted on. Going to be a big issue.
I'm going to ask the business council people that are coming on our Star panel, maybe that'll be on their list. Do you have another one before we go?
No, we cannibalized each other's,
You did? You got them all?
Yeah,
I think we know that.
All right. Big stories. How about let's look ahead. We're going to have our all-star business panel. They're going to come on. They're going to talk about, particularly from a business, the business community's point of view about what they think needs to be done in this state. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Well, guess what? It's time for our All-Star Business Panel. We're going to take a look at the year ahead. We're going to ask two of the leading business folks in the state to weigh in on what they think, possibilities and prospects for the next year for the business community. Gene Barr, he's the president and CEO of the PA Chamber of Business and Industry, and Fred Anton, same position, but with the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Fred Anton, what's going on next year in the business community? What are you looking for? Give me the first item.
The first item is the continual development of the Marcellus Shale and the resistance to tax the Marcellus Shale at any greater level than it's being taxed now. I regard the most underrated accomplishment of the Corbett administration the development of the Marcellus Shale and related projects. I think that has a tremendous long-term potential benefit for Pennsylvania, and I think it would be a disaster if we do anything to slow down the development of Marcellus Shale. The good news was the report that next to Texas, the gas coming out of Pennsylvania, just reported this last weekend, is second in the nation.
Mm-hmm. Now, the tax that Fred Anton refers to is the severance tax, correct?
Correct.
And you agree with Fred on that? Is that
Absolutely.
okay?
I mean, Marcellus has made significant changes to Pennsylvania's economy. We hear all the time this misnomer, they don't pay any taxes. It's flat out wrong. They pay the corporate net income. There's an impact fee. Levying a severance tax on top of that would be a tremendous disservice to the further growth of this industry.
All right, with the Republican legislature and Republican governor, do either of you think it's likely to happen?
Well, I wouldn't think so, but the trouble is we're looking at a very sizable budget problem here again this year.
And two Republican House members, Gene Girolamo and Tom Mertz, had a press conference over the weekend and called for a severance tax.
Yes.
All right.
I don't like that. I don't like that.
I think we now got that, Fred. You're pretty clear. Gene Barr, go ahead. Give me. What are you looking for next year?
Well, I think public pensions clearly is going to be one of those. It's contributing more than anything else to the problems we have in the state budget, and it goes back many years. It goes back to the 2001 changes. It added $10 billion when we went back and retroactively increased those benefits, and the failure to adequately fund those over those years. And that's not the fault of the teachers and state employees.
There were 4 years in which there were no employer contributions, right?
And now this administration is trying to put those dollars back in. That is a cost of education in this Commonwealth.
Fred.
Relatively minor changes in the pension program. The one that would be easiest to do, and they're talking about it at the federal level and at the state level, is change the pensions for new hires. Mm-hmm. And that would have a significant dollar impact. Now, the budget, the deficit is accumulating, apparently, from reports I read, for the current year.
Looks like $1 billion to $1.4 billion, according to the Secretary
if
of the
the
Budget.
pension, if there were some pension reform for new hires, that would relieve some pressure on the budget, and I think it's essential that it be done.
All right, Fred, your next issue for you. You had Marcellus Shale, Gene had pensions. What are you looking for?
I'm looking for a marked improvement of Governor Corbett's position in the polls. Mm-hmm. I think that, as was said on the prior segment, that the transportation bill and his softening of position on gay rights is likely to improve his standing in the polls. Personally, my number one objective that by a wide margin exceeds all others is the re-election of Tom Corbett.
Well, I think that's pretty true for most in the business community, correct?
Well, it is for me.
No, I understand.
It is, and we've endorsed him as well.
I know, yeah. All right, we're
We've
going to
clearly endorsed him.
Okay, we're running out of time here on this segment. All right, we'll be back. We'll continue to get what the business folks are looking for next year and next year's budget, next year's policies. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back. Well, our final segment with Gene Barr and Fred Anton, representatives of the business community. We're letting them weigh in on what they think is likely to happen next year. Whose turn is it?
Fine.
It's Fred's turn. Gene's turn. Gene, go ahead.
Let me go to an issue that was very close in June, and one that I think has tremendous support in this Commonwealth, which is greater customer choice and convenience in purchasing of alcoholic beverages. People want to be able to go into their grocery store, into a supermarket, into a convenience store, and buy beer, wine, and potentially other items as well. That's still sitting there. It's passed the House. It's the most comprehensive approach we've had in 50, 60 years. And I think people want that. And again, to go back to what Fred said, I think it would be something that would benefit our elected officials across the board to do this. People want this.
Fred?
I would like to see the Senate of Pennsylvania pass some liquor reform. I'd like to see them change the law, at least in relation to one item. I think the most likely—
What item is that?
Wine.
Wine.
And I think the beer problem with
It's complex because we have 1,200 wholesale beer distributors, and they're worried, and they're small mom and pop operations,
and
right? Go ahead, Fred.
The idea would be, as far as I'm concerned, that we take wine and move it into the convenience stores, and we start there.
So you want a gradual transitional approach?
No, I want a complete transition, but I don't think that's
you're
feasible.
Realistic?
I'm realistic, and I want to see some change in the law.
Well, you know,
What
and
do you
on the
think
beer
about that?
well, and on the beer side, what we're seeing more and more places now, because you have places like Wegmans and Giant and other supermarkets who are putting in enough seating accommodations with a cafe in order to get a beer license.
Oh,
so you're
in order
seeing
to
that.
meet that part of
Absolutely. Sheetz has done it. A lot of the supermarkets have done it. I think you'll see more and more of that.
Explain that for us.
I think you need the number of something like 30 or 36
Yeah,
seats.
but just conceptually, what does it mean?
What it means is that you have to put the 30 or 36 seats in, have food. You can then get a beer license, but there are restrictions. You can only get 2 6-packs at a time, whereas in the beer distributor, you have to buy the case. But I think you're going to see more and more of
And then
that.
if you go into a bar or tavern, you have to buy 6-packs. You can't buy a case.
You can't buy a case. You can buy 2. Try and explain all this to somebody who lives outside of Pennsylvania at some point. It gives
Fred,
you a headache.
I've not heard that concept before. All right, Gene Barr, you get the last one. Go ahead. Anything else other than that?
Well, we continue to see more and more agitation for what I call government-mandated wage increases. Some would say minimum wage. The reality is, and I heard even one of the advocates today acknowledge that if we did it, there would probably be some employment adverse effects, and that individual is absolutely right. We would see adverse effects. We're asking small business to pay more money to correct a social problem, and it's not right.
I'm going to ask both of you a question as we end the show, and this is this is unrehearsed. I didn't know what these guys were going to say. Are you bullish or bearish on the economy coming up?
I'm very bullish. I think this week the Fed scaling back on their program to stimulate the economy is extremely bullish. I think it indicates that their judgment is that things are getting better. I would say, I think the expanded number of people at the Pennsylvania Society is an indication of a better economy.
Gene Barr?
I'm somewhat less optimistic than Fred in that I see, unfortunately, a federal government that continues to make it more difficult to hire people. I'm concerned we're going to continue to see recovery with less employment, less jobs created than we have in the past. That's what concerns me.
Yeah. But overall, you think there will be some growth?
Overall, just from a cyclical perspective, you're going to see some. To go back to the example that Fred used, that's going to help generate some. You're going to see some of the money that is sitting on the sidelines come in. But again, I think we need a more comprehensive approach to create jobs.
All right, great update. We'll see if some of this comes true and we have you on through the next year. All right. Hey, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and as always, stay well.